After studying this module, you will be able to understand the use of strategy in entry deterring activities pursued by incumbent firms. Especially, you will learn a theoretical model of entry deterrence through capacity expansion, accommodation and blockaded entry, commitment and optimality, and other strategies for deterrence. In the 1990s, EasyJet, an airline, started operating as a low-cost, no-frills airline between different European cities. It used London Luton as its hub. Soon after it entered the London-Amsterdam segment, KLM, which held 40% of the market, responded by matching EasyJet's low-cost fares. For KLM, this amounted to pricing below cost and implied serious losses for EasyJet on this route. This is an example of an incumbent firm's tactics to induce the new firm or entrant to exit the market. In the early 1998, British Airways launched its own discount fare airline called Go. This move could be interpreted either as British Airways taking advantage of growth in demand for low fare flights or to eliminate as much competition as possible from small low fare airlines. Entry and exit decisions made by firms are affected by the strategic behavior at all entry stages. When making their entry decisions, firms anticipate the product market competition they will encounter if they decide to enter a particular market. But the entry decision itself is made in a non-strategic way. Firms simply compare expected benefits with cost of entering into that market. They perform a viability study. In industries with a small number of players, entrants must take into account directed retaliation by incumbent or existing firms. Similarly, incumbent firms should play an active role rather than just wait for a new firm to decide to enter the market. In this module, we will examine situations in which entry and exit result from strategic behavior by both incumbent and the entrant firm. First, we will consider with preemptive strategies an incumbent firm can employ to deter entry by potential rivals. Among the possible entry deterrence strategies, we will consider capacity expansion in detail and briefly discuss product proliferation and long-term contacts. The entry deterrence. In the early 1970s, in the United States, DuPont drastically increased its capacity for the production of titanium dioxide to deter the capacity or entry by the rival firms. Titanium dioxide is a white chemical used to make paper, paint and other products to make them whiter or opaque. The primary raw material for TiO2 is either ilmenite or ore or rutile ore. By 1970, DuPont, the large firm, had 6 smaller firms competing with it in the market. During the 1960s, DuPont mainly used ilmenite while its rivals used rutile. In the 1970s, a sharp increase in the price of rutile ore created a significant cost advantage for DuPont that was 22% in 1968 and 44% in 1972. In addition, stricter environmental regulation meant that several of DuPont's competitors would incur large costs to continue production. DuPont experienced a competitive advantage in several dimensions. First, its production process used a cheaper input. Second, its production process complied better with environmental standards. And third, Because of the cost advantage, the firm was in better financial shape, thus better positioned to expand capacity. The firm decided to leverage this advantage by expanding capacity at a pace sufficient to satisfy all of the growth in demand in the coming years. By expanding rapidly, first mover advantage, the DuPont would discourage expansion or entry by the rival firms. The firms managed to maintain a market share of 55% to 60% since late 1970s. By 1978, market share was close to 50%. By 1985, 5 competitors had exited the market. 3 of these firms had been acquired, 1 had stopped operating altogether, and 1 had shut down its plant in the US. These facts point to the materialization of DuPont's first mover advantage. So let us discuss about the theoretical model. Consider an industry with an existing firm, Firm 1, and one possible entrant, that is the Firm 2. Firm 2 must decide whether or not to enter, and in case it enters, how much to produce. Let us assume that capacity levels and output levels are identical just for simplifying the analysis. First, Firm 1 chooses its output level and then Firm 2 makes its decisions. So, we assume that Firm 2 observes Firm 1's output level before deciding whether to enter and how much to produce. Once both output levels have been chosen, just like in the Kunna model, price is determined as a function of total output. Figure 1 shows 3 profit curves, that is pi 1 m is Firm 1's profit in the event that it is a monopolist, and pi 1 s is Firm 1's profit when Firm 2 enters the market. Pi 1 s, as depicted in the figure, is only a function of Q1, that is Firm 1's output. So, the function assumes that Firm 2 chooses its optimal output as a function of Firm 1's initial output. Therefore, pi 1s is the profit level that Firm 1 expects to earn when Firm 2 enters the market and acts rationally. Pi 2 is the maximum profit earned by the Firm 2 given the output level of Firm 1. The value pi 2 does not include entry cost. If Firm 1 was sure that it would be a monopolist, it would set output at Q1m and earn profits pi 1m at Q1m. If instead it was sure that Firm 2 would enter, then it would set output at Q1s, the value that maximizes pi 1s at Q1. Suppose Firm 1 sets the monopoly output. There is an inherent problem with this strategy. Firm 2's profits from entry are positive, that is pi 2, which is greater than 0. Firm would therefore expect that setting the monopoly level of output, that is Q1m, will induce Firm 2 to enter the market. But then Firm 1's profits would be given by pi 1s, which is much lower than monopoly profits. Suppose Firm 1 sets an output level greater than monopoly output, that is Q1 is greater than Q1d. At this high level of output, Firm 2's profit when it enters the market would be negative. An output level Q1 is greater than equal to Q1d achieves entry deterrence in case that Firm 2 is rational. Because Firm 1's maximum profit in case it allows Firm 2 to enter, that is entry accommodation, are given by pi 1s at Q1s, entry deterrence is optimal if and only if pi 1m at Q1d is greater than pi 1s at Q1s, as shown when Q1 is less than Q1 hat. So by setting an output greater than monopoly output, Firm 1 sacrifice profits by amount pi 1m at Q1m minus pi 1m at Q1d. If Q1 is less than Q1 hat, then this amount is lower than what Firm 1 would lose if it were to let firm 2 enter the market pi 1m at Q1m minus pi 1s at Q1s. Entry accommodation and blockaded entry. The optimal strategy for firm 1 is not necessarily to deter firm 2's entry. If the entry cost is very low, it would be optimal for firm 1 to allow entry. When entry cost is very low, firm 2 will enter unless firm 1's output is very high. In this case, firm 2's potential profit will be very low, lower than the entry cost. This is shown in figure. If we compare with figure, the value of Q1D, which is firm 1's minimum output necessary to deter entry, is much larger, and the profit associated with the strategy of Q1 is equal to Q1D is much lower. The profit from entry deterrence, that is pi 1m at Q1D, is now lower than the profit from letting firm 2 enter pi 1s at Q1s. So firm 1's optimal strategy becomes one of entry accommodation. Hence, firm 1 should allow firm 2 to enter the market. In the reverse situation, if the entry cost is very high, firm 1 can ignore the threat of entry and choose the monopoly level of output. This situation is shown in figure. Even if firm 1 sets its output at the monopoly level, firm 2 will not find it optimal to enter. Because entry costs are very high, the threat of firm 2's entry is not relevant. This situation is known as blockaded entry. Hence, firm 1 does not have to worry about facing competition from firm 2. Commitment and optimality. So far, we haven't clarified if incumbent's initial move should be to set the level of capacity or to set the output level. This distinction can be quite important. Suppose first that capacity costs are 0 and that a firm may add capacity at any time. In that case, even though firm 1 is in the market before firm 2, firm 1 will be able to change its output decision even after firm 2 enters the market. Firm 1 is announcing its intention of producing output Q1D in case firm 2 enters. We can then ask, is this a believable or credible announcement by firm 1? For the announcement to be believable, firm 1 must find it's optimal to implement what it announces when the time comes for making the relevant decisions. Suppose firm 2 ignores firm 1's announcement and decides to enter and set output at the Cournot equilibrium. In this case, firm 1's best strategy would be to ignore its pre-announcement and choose the Cournot output. But the Cournot output level Q1n is less than monopoly output level and even less than the announced output level Q1D. So firm 2 should reason that by entering and setting Q2 at the Cournot level, it will make positive profits after deducting entry costs. Therefore, it should enter. Firm 1's announcement of output level Q1D is therefore not believable or credible. Now let us consider an alternative interpretation of the model. Before firm 2 decides to enter the market, firm 1 must choose production capacity. Capacity costs are very high and every investment in capacity is sunk. This means that even if firm 1 later chooses an output lower than the installed capacity, it still will not be able to avoid the capacity cost it previously paid. Suppose also that output cost other than the capacity cost are 0. In this case, firm 1 has a much greater incentive to increase output than before. Once capacity costs are paid, it will not cost firm 1 anything extra to set any output level up to the capacity. In addition to the assumption that capacity costs are high, we need the assumption that they are sunk. If they were not sunk, firm 2 could again enter and set output at the Kurna level, and firm 1's best reaction would be to sell capacity, recover the cost of previous investments and set the Kurna output level. Hence, capacity preemption is a believable, credible strategy only if capacity costs are high and sunk. Going back to our example of EasyJet, the UK market for low-fare airlines as of December 1997 had 4 main competitors. These were the Ryanair, Virgin Express, Debonair and EasyJet. In the third quarter of 1997, Ryanair owned 20 aircraft, Virgin Express 16, Debonair 6 and EasyJet 5. Ryanair announced that it will expand its fleet from 20 to 38 aircraft by 2000, and EasyJet announced an expansion by 10 aircraft. Will this deter expansion and or entry by the rival firms? Now let us discuss some other strategies for deterrence. There are 2 important qualifications of the theoretical model of deterrence by capacity expansion. First, it is not only a matter of deterring versus accommodating entry. An incumbent firm may be aware that it will be unable to avoid any type of entry at any time in the future. But different strategic investments made in the present are likely to influence the time at which entry will occur. The different times at which entry occurs will have different implications for incumbent firms' profitability. Suppose firm 2's maximum profits are given by pi2 star at Q1 and T. The entrance profits are a function of firm's output Q1. The new part of this model depends on time T. As time passes, there are different exogenous factors, that is technical progress, deregulation, demand expansion, etc. that make entry more attractive ceteris paribus. We assume that pi2 star at Q1 and T is increasing in T. This implies that firm 2 will enter at time T2 star when pi2 star at Q1 and T is equal to the cost of entering the market. At any time T is greater than T2 star. Firm 2 prefers being in the market as compared to staying out. Firm 1's problem now is to choose Q1. Considering that different values of Q1 imply different optimum entry times T2 star for firm 2 and therefore different profit streams for firm 1, that is monopoly profits until T2 star and duopoly profits after that. Second, the difference between many real world situations and the simple model presented earlier is that incumbents have various available strategies other than capacity expansion. For example, in addition to increasing capacity, the incumbent can also invest in service quality, cost reduction or brand recognition, the product proliferation and contracts. When an incumbent firm brings a large number of product variants or brands into the market with the idea of filling every niche in the market, that is product space, this strategy is known as product proliferation. In this scenario, a firm wanting to enter the market may not be able to introduce any new product and would have to compete with a well-established brand. This is also a strategy of entry deterrence. In addition, incumbent firm may enter into long-term contracts with input suppliers or firms that buy their finished product to deter entry by new firms. The terms of the contract could prevent the input supplier or output buyers from entering into business transactions with any rival firms. Now let us summarize what we have learnt from this module. There are various strategies that an incumbent firm can use to deter entry by new firms seeking to enter a market. Some of these include capacity expansion, product proliferation, long-term contracts, cost reduction, and brand recognition. In the case of capacity expansion as a strategy of entry deterrence, if entry costs are very high, then the incumbent should set monopoly capacity and ignore the threat of entry. This is an example of blockaded entry. If entry costs are very low, then the incumbent should choose capacity, taking into account the entrant's reaction curve. This is an example of entry accommodation. If entry costs are intermediate, then the incumbent should choose capacity large enough to induce the entrant not to enter. This is an example of entry deterrence. Capacity preemption is a believable, credible strategy only if capacity costs are high and sunk. An incumbent firm should be aware that it will not be able to avoid any type of entry at any time in the future. But different strategic investments made in the present are likely to influence the time at which entry will occur. The different times at which entry occurs will have different implications for the incumbent firm's profitability. Incumbent firms have various available strategies other than capacity expansion. For example, in addition to increasing capacity, the incumbent can also invest in service quality, cost reduction, or brand recognition. When an incumbent firm brings a large number of product variants or brands into the market with the idea of filling every niche in the market, this strategy is known as product proliferation. In addition, incumbent firms may enter into long-term contracts with input suppliers or firms that buy their finished product to deter entry by the new firms.